Unplugged. Raw, real, and unplugged answers to all of your psychic, spiritual, and paranormal questions. Hosted by me, professional psychic medium Allison Boswell, and my sometimes skeptical sidekick Nick.
Welcome back to the Spirit Unplugged podcast. Today we have a wonderful episode for you. Allison, would you like to tell our lovely listeners what you're going to be doing today?
Yeah, sure. What's up, Spirit Nerds? Today we're a little less scripted, and perhaps because of that, a lot more fun, I'd like to think. And Nick basically has come up with this list of questions to ask me about my journey being psychic, all that kind of wonderful stuff, because we thought it was about time after all of our super duper scripted episodes to come at you with just something very raw, real, pared down, unfiltered, that's very reminiscent of our #0 episode, our first ever kind of intro episode.
All right, so without further ado, question 1. When did you know you were psychic? What was it like for you on day 1?
I believe I spoke about this in episode #0, but when did I know I was psychic? I guess I've always kind of known that something weird was going on with me. I don't know what other context to put on it beyond the word weird, which I know is super vague, but that's kind of how it presents when you are naturally gifted, is that I always felt a bit separate, a bit weird. It became more intense, I would say, after post-secondary school, while I was working my super mundane muggle, corporate, very intensive, left-brain intellectual job. When I was still in that job, I started getting more and more super vivid HD 3D TV dreams coming forward, and they would be prophetic in nature, and I would be dreaming about something before it happens, and they'd be very specific sometimes. So that's kind of the time when I figured there must be something, like consciously, I became more aware of there must be something weird going on, because some of the stuff I would dream about freaked me out, but then I would be able to validate through people around me some of the stuff coming forward. And I've always kind of known the dream thing was an avenue for me receiving as well, because I almost always would dream about dead people. And in the dreams with dead people, people that I knew previously while they were alive, it wouldn't be a memory. It would be us hanging out doing something new. And I remember one where somebody that passed away when I was younger, I literally had a dream where we were surfing. Like it was just some random thing. So I've always kind of known a little bit. It became more obvious to me, I would say in my mid-20s-ish, because that's usually the age when you start, I guess, maybe owning more of who you are. Is it fair for me to say that, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. You kind of stop being the little person that you were, and you kind of start to realize what you like.
Yeah, when I was becoming more into my adulthood of understanding who I was, and I was on this really epic journey of doing that prior to us meeting and us going out on our first date, because I spent about 2-3 years before that really self-assessing, working on self-love, working on unpacking like old emotional baggage. And through the course of doing that, that's when my gifts started kind of coming out a little bit more. What was it like on day 1? It's hard for me to have a day 1. It's like I have multiple day 1s. So like there's day 1 that I talk about publicly when I'm doing lectures and stuff, and I believe I probably mentioned in episode #0, where I woke up one day in my mediumship, and I just saw dead people everywhere in the house. And that was when we were together, when that happened. So that's one of my day 1s, but that's more so my mediumship ability. My psychic ability, day 1, I don't know that I have a day 1 so much as like very specific memories of like creepy stuff. So one that I shared recently in a session that the person I was in the session with was like flabbergasted by, like they were taken back by this kind of event episode that I had, was I remember having a dream. It's fairly graphic, so like turn down your volume if you're not interested. I remember having a dream during that weird period of me working corporate and me having like precognitive dreams. I had this dream that was very graphic where I was giving birth and it was a stillbirth, and it was very graphic in terms of like how I was laying down, the people around me, like the gore kind of element to it. And when I woke up the next day, which I usually did at this period of time because I didn't have Nick at that time, I would call my mom and talk to her about these things. So I called her up the next day and I told her, like, I had this very, like, weird, strange, vivid dream about a stillbirth, and I explained it to her. And my mom then told me, because my mom's the one that validated this one for me, she told me back when she was a nurse, she was nursing in the obstetrics department. That night that I had had that dream, she was on a night shift overnight. So she was working while I was sleeping and while I was dreaming. And there was a stillbirth on the floor where she was working. She was involved with it. I then found out, I got this validated by a second person weeks later, but I then found out that the person that had the stillbirth was a cousin of someone I worked with in that corporate job. So, like, that's not necessarily day one, but that's definitely one of those standout moments of WTF. Like, there's something going on here.
Is that something you admitted to yourself, like, at that point, or was it just kind of like, well, that was a fun coincidence?
It wasn't even a fun coincidence. I was legit freaked out. And I just kind of honestly compartmentalized it and put it in a box because I was still doing like a heavy, intensive corporate type of job, and there was no room for that in my life with all the emotional unpacking I was doing and like preparing myself for getting out there more seriously dating and stuff leading up to meeting you. There was no room for unpacking paranormal shit, for lack of a better word.
So you kind of figured it was paranormal. You just didn't want to have anything to do with it at the time?
Paranormal is probably not the best word for me to use. I knew that it was not normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to label it beyond quote unquote not normal because I didn't want, with all that, when you're in a huge healing stage and you're really like going through the onion layers of who you already have enough to unpack. The last thing that you want to do is like unearth new weirdness. I had a lack of willingness to unearth new weirdness basically at that point, so I just didn't want to go there. But I think I freaked out myself. I freaked out my mom. When the person validated for me that it was their cousin, I don't think I told them the whole story. I held that back because it was already compartmentalized a little bit. So yeah, I have a series of day ones. I'm still having day ones right now, weirdly, because like these gifts are always evolving and changing.
Is that typical with gifted people?
Yeah, especially with the nature of psychic that I am. So if you're psychic but you choose not to engage in your psychic abilities in a professional manner, which is what I choose to do and what I'm called to do, if you're just walking around in your muggle mundane life psychic, you might not notice an evolution of the gifts as obviously. But because at this point, I've done hundreds of thousands of client sessions, and because of the volume that I'm working with, because I'm constantly spending half my life on the other side, basically with spirit, I'm constantly evolving. So people that work more so professionally will have that I call it spiritual leveling up, for lack of a better word, but those that work more so professionally or engage in the spiritual side a little bit more will level up regularly. And I have some clients where it will happen every few months, and that's how it was for me in the beginning. Do you remember that period in time where I was getting sick all the time?
Yeah.
When I first opened up?
Just so you know, folks, when she says level up, it's not like a do. It's like a couple weeks of like sneezing and.
It kind of is like video game leveling up. That's why I call it that. You're now level 13 psychic.
Alright, I get to choose my new stats. What am I going to put my stats into? Sorry, what were we talking about?
The whole spiritual leveling up thing, and I said, remember when I used to get sick all the time in the first, like, what was it, the first year that I was doing this work professionally? I was getting physically sick, like, every month? Every 2 months? I don't have a lot of memory of it, so you're going to have to help me out here.
Well, it was like, he kind of explained it like you were getting a tune-up, and you would always be just a little bit more adept at your psychic craft.
Yeah, but I was getting physically sick. Like, I was having fevers and hallucinating, and...
There was a physical component about it. And then when it was over, you had that tune-up. But I do remember one time I was going to work, and I know you'd had been sick, I work nights, so it's kind of like getting late. And Allison looks at me and she goes, "Why are the boo-boos cantaloupes? The boo-boos are our cats, by the way." And like I just thought I better call her parents because I can't miss work, and I don't think she should be alone.
I remember this. What's weird is that when memories are brought up to me, I see them as pictures and videos in my head because my guides are reminding me visually through my clairvoyancy, my ability to see in spirit, what happened. They legit, because I'm a huge cartoon anime watcher, they legit look like cartoon, like cantaloupe with their head poking out, and their paws, and their tail.
Okay.
You're not having it, eh? You're not into it.
No, that's just weird.
I know. I'm so strange. I'm so weird.
Did you ever feel vulnerable going through these level ups when you felt sick and you weren't feeling the greatest?
I honestly thought for a long time in the first year of being psychic, like being out as a psychic, I should say, being aware of being psychic, I honestly thought that there was something legitimately wrong with me. Like I had an illness, I had a disease, I had like a physical health condition, because it's not normal to get fevers every 2 months, every month. And it's not normal to necessarily hallucinate during fevers. And I believe you had to take me to the hospital at least twice, where I had a fever over like 104 or something. And I had to go on fluids and a bunch, like I had to go on intravenous fluids at the hospital. And then I think at that time we also discovered my iron. Was that when we discovered my iron was really low too?
I remember you saying that you had problems with your iron before we got together.
Okay, so it was a recurring problem. Excuse me. It came up again at that time that I was going through all that. So yeah, just weirdness.
Next question. How did you tell your partner?
Do you mean romantic partner?
No, I mean your business partner. Yes, your romantic partner.
Okay, but you're both, so you're confusing me. You are my business partner and my romantic partner. How did I tell you? I don't even know what my quote-unquote coming out story is for my psychic ability. You might have to remind me. Do you have any memory of that? Because it's a blank black slate in my head. I don't even remember.
Yeah. You just came out and told me, and I was kind of like taken aback. And then you kind of, here's your free demo.
Oh, I demonstrated it? I'm like mortified right now.
And I was like, she's a wizard.
You didn't say which. Why not? How did I demonstrate it? Was it my mediumship or my psychic ability?
It was your mediumship. It was, your dead grandfather's here, and, this is what he's saying. He's so happy to see you grow into the man that you've become.
Yeah, and I think I came up with a lot of details that you had never told me.
Pretty much.
And is it fair to say you became a believer at that point?
I was still pretty skeptical. The thing that I was really confused about is I have a pretty good memory for things I talk about with people. Forever bringing things up from the past that people have said that, Nick, how did you know that? Well, you told me 2 years ago. And it's like, you remember that after 2 years? How do you not remember that after 2 years?
Yeah, I don't know how you remember, because I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. And the answer to that is I probably haven't had breakfast, but I don't know how you remember those details. So with that living memory, was I coming up with details that you remember telling me at some point?
No, you were coming up with details I don't remember telling you. So if I don't remember telling you something, it's probably because I didn't, which is, something to remember next time we have a fight.
You don't want to go there, because I'll conversation ninja your ass right now.
Is there anything else you want to say about this?
I don't remember how it happened, so thank you for filling in that blank for me, that Mad Lib for me, because I don't remember the mechanics of it. And I usually don't when it comes to channeling. That's why it's a blank slate. When I'm channeling, it's not my information. I'm just a telephone line. So any memory of mine where channeling was involved does not exist in my memory bank. So thank you for filling that in for me. I remember, though, the fear I had in telling you about it because at that point, I think we were dating for 2 years and we had been living together for, I'm not even going to say as long because that's kind of embarrassing. We were dating for 2 years and pretty much living together for 2 years at that point. So I was very afraid of telling you the whole psychic stuff because it was not a part of our getting to know each other, dating. I had never really told you I was into any new age anything. It was kind of a departure. Now, after 8 years almost with you, like, I'm not afraid to tell you anything because I just know how blanket accepting you are, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was very afraid of coming out of the closet with that with you and afraid that it would basically like end the relationship because I didn't know whether I was crazy dealing with all this. So then you're kind of my external litmus test and voice of reason. Honestly, legit, Nick, sometimes you're my Jiminy Cricket. You're like all those things rolled together for me. So telling you about that stuff was very scary for me because it was like, am I still gonna have a relationship after telling you this? Or is this like just a bridge too far? Okay, hands in the air, I'm done. And you're wackadoo. And I can't anymore. I'll pack my bags and leave. So I didn't know what I was going to get in telling you. And if anyone knows me personally, they know I'm a bit more of an introvert and like I'm very secret with my personal life and personal information. I've just always been that way. So I always have that anxiety, that fear of sharing parts of myself, being vulnerable, as I'm sure we all do at some point. And it was just another layer of being vulnerable with you that I was very afraid of because at that point, 2 years in, like you were my best friend. I knew I wanted a future with you. I was in love with you. Still am. All those things are still true, just even more to the nth degree now. But it was very scary, the idea of losing you. However, I have learned through being with you that I need to be myself. Mm-hmm. And that's why I worked up the courage to do that because if there's anything you've taught me, it's so much easier to be comfortable in your skin when you're yourself. And so I can credit you 100% with where I am in my career as a psychic medium because I would never have gotten here if I wasn't with someone so accepting and loving and teaching me to accept and love myself. Not to get mushy-gushy with you, but thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Wow, I didn't know I was so insightful.
That's Nick's joking voice, guys. I'm sure you can't tell the difference. That's Nick telling a joke. Like, he knows how insightful he is. He totally does.
What would you tell people that are, like, going through this with their partner? And have you ever heard anyone, like, have a relationship end because of this, or?
So, this is me drawing on, like, hundreds of thousands of readings, and, like, I'm like that meme right now. You know that meme that has, like, the math going around the head? It's a pretty iconic meme.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like someone staring off in the distance and there's all these equations in white around the head.
Like, I think there's a Bitmoji who would like that.
Right. Spirit's doing that to me right now. And sometimes when you ask questions, it's like I immediately, like, imagine my face as that meme. I immediately go there because Spirit's like, and this is part of my left brain side because I took statistics and, like, aced it, rocked it in university. And I've always been a huge statistical kind of nerd. It's like Spirit runs the statistical probabilities in my head over a course of hundreds of thousands of readings, and now there's lag time because it's hundreds of thousands of readings, which is why I just explained all that because I now have the output, the answer, and so I needed some time to fill before I got there. I've done a lot of, obviously, romance readings over the years with clients, and yes, I do happen to read a lot more intuitive people. They just happen to come to me. I'm not sure what the draw is, what the connection is, but we just vibe together and they come to me for a session. And typically people who are more intuitive have difficulty being raw, real, vulnerable in relationships, and it can be hard to start off as super intuitive with people unless you're very comfortable in your own skin. And then there's like that delay between, have you told them in the beginning, when do I tell them? And especially when you don't have the labels of what to call your intuitive ability, or you're constantly evolving and changing, it's hard to define those things to a partner. So have people like broken up as a result of this? I'm sure it's happened. I can't remember any specific example right now in my, spiritual statistical analysis that's happening inside my own head. But I definitely have had a lot of conversations with intuitive people that have difficulty. And weirdly, this wasn't your question, but I will say it, weirdly, it's harder for two gifted people together to work it out than one gifted person and one not gifted person. It's actually easier for a skeptic and a psychic to be together romantically than for two psychics.
That makes sense.
Okay. I thought I would have something shocking for you, but you still, Nick, have your everything face where nothing phases you.
Well, we've talked about it before where usually there should be someone who has their feet firmly planted on the ground, especially if someone has their head in clouds. So it would make sense if, someone's always off in woo-woo psychic land receiving, that it might behoove them to have someone to keep them grounded.
Yeah, you're that for me for sure. I can't even say you're my rock, because that feels like understatement of the century to me. You're my everything. I always say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. It's always nice to know where I stand.
You're so cute.
The next question I have here is dealing with friends and family? Question mark?
It's not a very well written question, eh? Honestly, I talked about the fear in telling you. It was way more difficult to come out to friends and family. Way more difficult. And in fact, I still struggle with it, especially in the friends front. And I've lost friendships as a result of coming out as psychic. And really, my coming out as psychic is not quote unquote normal, because I came out as psychic and then within a month I was doing this full-time professionally. So like there was no, I slowly come out as psychic to a few people and it stays a secret. It was like I was publicly doing this professionally, so there was no hiding any aspect of that journey. Like my whole journey was out for everyone to see. So family, this I have memory of because it was very emotional for me. So my mom has always been a bit more of a believer, and leading up to my quote-unquote coming out for this, I was very active in communicating with my mom about the dreams and everything that I mentioned earlier, and my mom is fairly gifted herself as well as my sister, so we've always had conversations about seeing signs and symbols. And I believe at the time of this happening, even before that, we had a sign symbol for my grandmother that was very constant in all of our lives. Like my sister, where she lived, would get it all the time, my mom would get it all the time, and I would get it all the time. We all had the same sign or symbol from my mom's mom or my sisters and I, our grandmother. So coming out to my mom was kind of cathartic and comforting in a sense, because she was already willing to accept that side in terms of the gifts. However, by extension, the career she wasn't sure of. And the career, doing it full time, she was almost in the beginning questioning a lot of those decisions, because, and a lot of people in my life did, because I channeled a lot of whatever the quote-unquote next step was. So my career started off with a bang very quickly, because I was being guided every detail, every step by my spirit guides. They gave me everything, which shops to work out of, who to contact for shows. So I started very quickly because they were the ones that drove the bus and told me who to talk to, who to phone, who to have meetings with, all that kind of stuff. So from an outsider perspective, my mom was kind of unsure about all that. My dad is a completely different story. And like, I love my dad so much. He reminds me, or rather you remind me of him, Nick. And I always joke about that, where it's like, people say you're going to end up with someone who's like your parent. I totally did. I'll admit to it. I totally did end up with somebody that's like exactly like my dad. Like you have the same mannerisms, you say the same things, you love the same foods. Like it's uncanny. So my dad was very concerned for me. And my dad, I think, was more concerned about like mental health aspect, whether I was like okay mentally. And he was just very concerned about, is there something that should be done about this as a parent?
Because your dad dealt with a lot of mentally ill people in his career, right?
Yeah, because my dad also used to work at a hospital, but more in an operations capacity. But yeah, he would have witnessed a lot of. He dealt with security, so he would have witnessed a lot of like formed patients or like mentally unwell people coming through a hospital. And if you're coming through a hospital at that point, you're on a whole different level. I feel in terms of unwellness mentally. I think it's fair for me to say that. So yeah, he was very concerned, and I have memory of this. My guides are giving it to me right now. I want to say gifting because they're gifting me this memory right now. My dad ended up believing me in the same way that you did, where I channeled about his past, and I channeled about his parents, and I channeled about his high school experience, his upbringing, and I channeled details that I would never have in a million years known because I must get that private way about my life through my parents. They don't tell me a lot about their upbringing or different things in the family or especially hardships. They don't tell me about a lot of those kinds of things. So I was able to channel details that were just like beyond what he could have imagined. And I remember it being like a 2-hour long conversation. And after that conversation, just even the look in his eye, he looked at me completely differently after that. And for a while there in the beginning of my career, in the first 2 years, my mom and dad would travel with me to the shows. And it was like a family affair. Nick would travel with me to some shows, and then my parents would travel with me to others, certain venues. And my dad then became my biggest fan. So there's a happy ending to this whole story. My dad is like my number one fan. And he cheers me on louder than anyone else. He's so proud to tell people about his psychic medium daughter now. And he's all about it. But yeah, dealing with family and friends has been very difficult for me. And in general, I feel like it's difficult as a psychic, especially with like polarizing cultural traditions and religious beliefs and practices. And it can be very difficult to open up that conversation and to let it all out there. I had no choice but to with family because I was very quickly coming into this stage professionally. And there was no hiding it. So I had to. With friends, I don't know if you have memory of a lot of this stuff, Nick, because like it's very fractured memory for me. I've never been one to have a lot of friends because I'm super introverted, but I definitely know people treated me differently before and after coming out as a psychic.
Would you say that they were coming at you from a place where they thought you were crazy or maybe concerned, or maybe they just didn't want to have anything to do with that kind of belief?
I think it's the last one, not wanting to have something to do with that kind of belief, because people who knew me in high school or knew me from when I was younger, and I mean, I still live in an area that I grew up in, so that's prevalent. Most of the people around me I went to school with or high school with or what have you. I think a lot of them would look at me how this profession is seen, because this profession is not seen as something legitimate to a lot of people. It's seen as very much like a sideshow act, or it's seen as like fortune telling or whatever it is that you wish to call it. And that's not a bad thing. Like, that aesthetic is iconic with this type of work, and it is somewhat the roots of this type of work. However, that kind of perspective adds in the whole fakeness to it. And I think people just looked at me as like this quiet girl that was always kind of a follower in high school and public school and everything is now like publicly a psychic and doing lectures and traveling around Ontario and doing all this stuff. Like, I think they thought I was weird. You know, I think still a lot of people think of me as eccentric. And I'm actually probably the least eccentric person you'd ever meet. Like, I'm actually very blandly normal. I'm not that eccentric in my personal life. So I think people would just look at me that way. And then, so that's the people that didn't really believe in this kind of stuff. Like, if there's skepticism about it and they know the history of who I am, then there's skepticism about me doing this for a living. And then there would be people that would transition into wanting to use my gifts and talents and abilities. And in the beginning, I was so bad at boundaries for that because I would allow it, because I felt that need to practice. And I didn't have that filter system with my spirit guides where I could hold information back, because I had to work a lot for years to put up enough protection between me and spirit that I don't always receive. But in the beginning, I was receiving every time I was in a conversation, every time I was leaving the house. So I would have people that would kind of take advantage, honestly, in the beginning. And they would want to know about their life, or they'd pump me for information, or they'd want to know. It would start off very subtly as like, well, how does it work? And like, what do you do? And like, how do you believe such and such and this and that? And then eventually it would lead to like, oh, I've been having trouble in my job or my love life, or, I miss my grandmother, which is a reading, and I get paid for to do that work. There's an energy exchange there. So my dealing with my family was heartbreaking in the beginning, but there's a happily ever after to that story, very much happily ever after. Dealing with friends is still heartbreaking to me because coming out as a professional psychic medium has really reduced the amount of friends in my contact list on my phone, for sure. And I can think of one really good friend that has made the transition with me and is totally 100% respectful of not talking about being a psychic. She invites me to things and knows that if there's ever any Venn diagram overlap between a previous current client and an event she's inviting me to, she's totally understanding of me bailing or not going. And whenever we hang out, she just never asks me about that stuff. And if she notices that I'm kind of tripping into it or I'm transitioning into it, she'll be the first one to call me on it and be like, don't channel, let's just have another glass of wine instead. So I hope describing all that, she knows who she is, because obviously with like confidentiality, I can't say her name, but I have one friend that's made the transition with me. I, of course, have a bunch of new friends from the traveling that we've done, Nick, and the journey that we've taken. And so I don't want it to sound like I have one friend. I have tons of friends that I've met after coming out, but I have one friend that's made the journey with me from before coming out to after.
You do say that, coming out, you've mentioned that a few times. Would you say that there is a stigma going along with being a psychic medium, not necessarily just a professional, but can you see why someone would be hesitant to tell their family and friends or be out there with it 100%?
Yeah, totally, because I am that way. I am so afraid to tell people what I do for a living in social situations. And in fact, we have tons of conversations about this, Nick, and we had a conversation about this, 2 days ago, where it's the age-old conversation that crops up with us every few months whenever we're in a very social period outside of traveling for work. I always turn to you, Nick, and I ask, like, okay, so what's the story now? What do I tell people I do for a living? Am I a consultant? Right now, like you've suggested, I say life coach, which I kind of like the idea of doing that because it is still health and wellness and it is still service-based. So yeah, it can be a very scary thing to tell people that you are psychic or tell people that you do that for a profession, or I can't remember the original question, so trailing off a little bit. I can't remember what you originally said.
Can you see how someone wouldn't want to come out of the psychic closet?
Oh yeah, because I don't want to come out of the psychic closet. Like, I have like ragingly come out of the psychic closet, and it's all over my website, and I'm super duper public about it. But guess what? I still sometimes like tiptoe back in that closet and don't tell people that I meet for the first time, and there are some people I would rather just never know what I do for a living, for sure. So I'm still like afraid of it. I'm still hesitant in sharing it because like nobody wants to be judged. Nobody wants to be judged for how they look, their lifestyle choices, and a lot of that stuff you can't control. And guess what? When you're a natural psychic, you can't control that either. So like, I would rather not go there or open the door to that for a lot of people in social situations, because I have some situations where I have done that and it's been like hurtful. And I remember that like a few years ago, because we're huge nerds, gamers, and we're very publicly open about that side of ourselves too. I remember in like a nerdy gamer kind of environment, it coming out in a way, like I think maybe you said something. I don't think it came out in a way that I said it, but then it turned into like a topic of conversation amongst the people there, and there were some very uncomfortable questions asked towards me that were very not aggressive, but it was very like there was a tone to the voice that was like obviously skeptical and obviously like joking about it, making fun of it while asking the questions and expecting an answer, like an outright thorough answer from me about it. And it made me so uncomfortable that I stopped engaging in that particular environment and that particular group of people. Like I just immediately, I left that day and did not go back, and still have no intention to go back into that kind of situation. So it sucks. Like, I don't know how else to say it. It really sucks because we're in a society where are people waking up? Sure. Like, everybody in New Age community is all focused on everyone's waking up, love and light, all that kind of stuff. But guess what? There's a lot of people still freaking asleep and like not about it and super skeptical about it, and will judge you the second they know that you have any belief in that field. And it doesn't matter what age they are, what culture, what anything, like young, old. There's still so many people that will look at you differently, treat you differently, and even be rude about it. So like, I'm still afraid to tell a lot of people about it, and I still sometimes like think about the fact that my name is out there attached to all this stuff, and I get like anxiety about it because I suffer from a lot of anxiety, but I get anxiety about that sometimes. So yeah, it's like really I've had to go forward on the friendship front and the social front. I've had to go forward with like compartmentalized versions of Allison. So there's a version of Allison that engages in the social, nerdy, gamer type of community, anime, convention, all that kind of stuff type of community. And then there's obviously a version of Allison that does business, and people who are also my friends and see the business side of me can tell the difference right away, whether I'm in business mode or not. And yeah, that's the only way I've been able to survive on the friend front. I hope it gets better. Everything evolves, right, Nick? So I hope it gets better over time, but you don't know.
We've already talked a bit about this, but how do you deal with skeptics? You've talked about what it's like, but how do you deal with it?
Oh, skeptics. My first thing I always say about skeptics is that I actually really love a good, healthy skeptic. And my definition of good, healthy skeptic is someone that is, you know, open and receptive to the conversation, but still is requiring whatever evidence they need to turn from a skeptic into a believer, even if it's possible for them to turn from a skeptic into a believer, and the whole spectrum that lies between skeptic and believer, because there is a spectrum. And if you don't know about that spectrum, watch the X-Files, because it's the best example. Scully and Mulder on the X-Files is the best example of that spectrum over the seasons of skeptic and believer, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, God damn it, Scully, we just had vampires last week. Why are we still going over this?
Yeah, why do you still not believe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a whole spectrum between skeptic and believer, for sure. How do I deal with skeptics? I think I turn into my left-brained Allison. That's my corporate Allison. And I also feel like it's fairly easy for me to navigate skeptics that are healthy skeptics and not necessarily belligerent. My last example in terms of friendship of what I've dealt with, because I think I articulate myself fairly well based on the more left-brained side of myself, and that's why I say I go into corporate mode like left-brained Allison, where I try to ground a lot of what I do and how I communicate what I do in reality. And I definitely tone down the woo-woo-ness. And I wouldn't say I'm that woo-woo to begin with, quite honestly. Like, people may perceive me as super-duper woo-woo, but, like, I'm very normal, mundane, and even boring in my normal everyday life. I'm not super-duper woo-woo. And that's a comment that I get from a lot of past clients, too, is that I'm very, wow, you're surprisingly normal. It's what I get a lot.
Yeah, that's one thing that we've learned interacting with other psychics. Even if they do put on the garb, they'll throw up all the
trims and trappings and crystal ball and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we see them an hour before all that stuff goes on, and they're wearing a t-shirt before they put on, you know, their work uniform. It's just like any other profession where you are a little different in your private life.
Yeah, I'm going to say it in this way, because I want to say it in a bit more of a PC way. There is a certain expected aesthetic to the whole psychic medium thing. we all know what that certain specific aesthetic is what I was about to say, right? And so there's this expectation through especially skeptics that in the media and in like movies and especially in like fiction have been really inundated with that certain specific aesthetic of a psychic medium, which is very like dun 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 dun, 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 right?
Yeah.
So when people meet me that are a skeptic, I find that overwhelmingly most of the time they expect that certain aesthetic, and then they meet me and they're like, "Wow, you're like legit normal and grounded." So like, how do I deal with skeptics? I just deal with them like I would anybody else. And I just be myself. And I be authentic. And if someone who's a super diehard skeptic is still skeptical about me, even with me just being myself, then like I choose not to care. I don't know if that's bad for me to say, but I choose not to hold on to it beyond that because their skepticism is a personal journey of their own. And it's not for me to try to go around and convince people and get people to believe in me. Like, that's the number one thing that I feel about this whole psychic medium journey is like it's not my job to get people to believe. Like, and quite frankly, if spirit gave me that job, I'd be like, no thank you. Can you take that out of my soul contracts? I don't want that tied to my karma at all. I don't want that in my next lifetime. I don't want the job of trying to convert and get people to believe because like you can't. It's not a successful job. Like you can't.
It's not your responsibility to convert the world to
no
or legitimize yourself.
And I wouldn't want to. Yes, and Nick, I'm so exhausted of trying to legitimize myself. Like, I still get people to this day that go to events sometimes and they're like, okay, like, basically, in not so many words, prove to me that you're psychic. Like, prove to me that you can do it. Prove to me that you can connect. And I always answer no. If you're that skeptical about me and you need me to prove to you that I can connect, then I'm not your reader.
I think one thing you also said that you like about skeptics is, you know what, great, you're skeptical. I'm here to talk about books, or I'm here to play board games, or I'm here to do this other thing. So I don't want to have to talk about that. I want to have to talk about my other interests.
Yeah, that's my personal life stuff that's going back to the social and friendship, and you're so right. Because if it does come out in that kind of environment, it's like, yeah, great, can we move on? Like, would this be a topic of conversation if I told you I was a dentist? Or if I told you I, like, what's the name for it at Subway? A sandwich artist?
A sandwich artist,
yeah. If I told you I was a sandwich artist, would you ask me, like, yeah, how's that rye bread? Like, no, it wouldn't be a conversation, right? So, yeah, that's how I deal with skeptics. And I love skeptics. I absolutely do love, appreciate, respect, honor skeptics. I feel like they have to exist to bring that certain psychic medium aesthetic I was alluding to earlier into more of a modern light where the skeptics need to exist as like the litmus test of what's real versus fake. I love that. I appreciate that. I want skeptics to be out there because it forces those of us in this field to work harder at through how we carry ourselves, legitimizing who we are. Not through how we demonstrate our skills and abilities, but how we choose to carry ourselves, how we choose to articulate what it is that we do, how we choose to own what it is that we do, and present ourselves in a professional business manner. Yes, please. More skeptics, because there's no regulatory shit to any of this, right? So lay on all the skeptics. I love that about them. But like, how do I deal with them? I treat them like everyone else. Really?
I'm looking at the questions I have written out here, and I just realized that I have a question mark after a statement.
It's okay, I love you for it. Just like, can you read it as written with the question mark on the end, just so I can laugh if it's funny?
You got into the psychic industry early on. Question mark.
Oh,
why did you do that?
I wish you would have said it with like the inflection, like, you got into the psychic industry early on?
I'll do that right now.
Yes, I did.
You got into the psychic industry early on?
Yes, I did. So this is me being psychic again. This is that moment of that meme of all this math around my head, because my guides are like, this is what he meant by that question. This is part of what I do in a reading, is that a client will say something and it might not be something I understand, but my guides translate for me. So my guides are translating for me that what you meant by that question is almost like the timeline of how I got into the psychic industry, like how quickly I got into it, right? That's what you meant by it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, why did you go straight from admitting to yourself that you were psychic to now I'm doing this for a living?
Okay, so this is gonna sound crazy, even on Spirit Unplugged, a podcast with a professional psychic medium. This is gonna sound crazy.
We're not here to talk about crazy stuff, Allison. We're here to talk about being psychic.
I got into the industry early. Why did I choose that? Or, like, why? The answer is I didn't. I know this is going to sound so strange, but when I opened up in my mediumship, I opened up to my spirit guides right away. I never had to do those meditations to get in tune with your spirit guides. I never had to, like, work on connecting to them. I saw them. They gave me their names. They gave me, like, history periods that they came from. They came forward one right after another. One of my first exercises in connecting was, like, keeping this journal where each page was, like, a profile on a spirit guide. And I filled the journal and then realized, like, their name, who they are, doesn't matter. Listening to their advice and trusting the relationship does. So, like, I don't necessarily care about those details anymore. But in a roundabout way, that's how I got into the industry so quickly. Is because when I opened up to my mediumship, and then within 2 months when I was doing my first show, I was on Spirit Guide hotline, and they were almost militant in giving me marching orders. In the first year and a half that I was a psychic, every business decision was them, not me. And I know that that sounds crazy because people are like, people are almost would maybe not believe that there would be that constant dialogue in your head, but they made every decision, my pricing, what shows to do, who to call, shops to work out of. I alluded to that earlier. Like, they made every decision for me. I didn't even have to ask questions. They volunteered the information. Like, I would wake up in the morning. This is kind of the routine we developed after a few months. I would wake up in the morning. I would journal right away in the morning because I would wake up with my list in my head of these are the things you have to do today. And sometimes the list was so specific for my spirit guides that it was like, you have to try to connect with 3 new clients today. And I wouldn't know where these clients are coming from. I wouldn't know what they meant by that. I would still write it down. And then lo and behold, I would connect with 3 people and it would lead to future sessions in the day. But they would give me my marching orders, what I called then, quote unquote, every day. And it would almost become part of my routine where you get up, you do your morning pee, you eat your breakfast, you brush your teeth. For me, it was like, while I was brushing my teeth, doing my hair, doing my makeup, staring at myself in the mirror, they would have that morning meeting with me with my marching orders. They would give me that list. I would go write it down, and then I would do everything on that list that they told me to do. They don't do that with me anymore, mostly because, like, they're laughing in my head, mostly because I don't voluntarily listen to them as actively as I used to. I've become skeptical, so, like...
It sounds like they marched you into the psychic industry at gunpoint, and then you realize that gun's not real.
Kind of. Honestly, kind of. It sounds so bizarre, and I get that people are going to be listening to this kind of like, really, Allison? And maybe, like, not believing it. I get that, because it sounds so weird, so bizarre. But it was very much like that in the beginning. Although I don't want to say at gunpoint. I want to say more so like, what would I compare it to? I very much had a team behind me every single day in the beginning, and it was almost as if, like, I was getting all the credit for the work, of course, but they were driving the bus, might be the way for me to say it more so. So, I mean, there's 2 groups of people, or there's 2 people that I can really credit where I am in my career right now to. And, like, group number 1 is you and my family for sure, hands down. Because if I didn't have that acceptance from you guys and that ability to work with me and travel with me in the beginning, like, it would never have happened, for sure. And then the second group is my spirit guides, because they basically created my whole career for the first year and a half. I maybe took over the reins between year 1 and 2. I took over the reins a little bit, and, like, more so in year 3. But in the beginning of my career, they made every decision, and they still make a lot of my decisions for my work. So why did I go into the industry early? I mean, ask them. Maybe I will ask them right now. Why did I go into the industry We know you, Allison. If you hadn't gone professional within like 4 to 6 months, this would have just been another blip on your radar, like another like quick shot in the pan, another quick like hobby or interest or quote unquote phase. So because we know you and the type of person you are, it had to be that quick. It had to be that professional. And they always tell me stuff like this, and I don't know how much other people are going to believe it, but I'm going to say it because I'm channeling it right now. They're telling me you were meant to do this work, you agreed to do this work, so we had to make it happen quickly so that you wouldn't have regrets, you wouldn't question, you wouldn't doubt, and you wouldn't like self-sabotage. And then they're telling me like you do now, because like this is the love-hate relationship I have with my guides now, is it's in their opinion that for the past like 2 to 3 years I've been more self-sabotagey with my career and just like digging in my heels and not doing everything that they tell me. So I've been noticing more so over the last few years that they tell me to do something, I ignore it, and then it doesn't work out, and then they're like, yeah, we told you. So I think I'm coming into another period where I'm going to start listening more aptly, I hope. Fingers crossed they roll their eyes at that. But yeah, that's how I got into the industry early on and why. Oh my god, Nick, I feel like that was a long explanation for something super simple. But I'm also looking at your notes, like the questions you came up with today, and we're not even halfway through. And I think we're going to have to do this in multiple segments, because like we still have so many questions to go through.
I think you're right. So if you folks out in podcast land would like to stay tuned for episode number 2, that is going to be coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks-ish. I'm not really on time much these days, but 2 weeks-ish.
So you stay spooky, podcast listeners, and we will see you again in the future.
And as always, thank you for listening. We love you. We appreciate you so much. Nick picked today's questions for me about all things psychic medium related, but if you happen to be listening as fly on the wall to our conversation and discovered some new questions you want answered, then please email us, spiritunpluggedpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, we're going to be covering more questions in our next episode, so stay tuned for that. But while you're craving more super special, nerdy, spooky fun with us, make sure to subscribe to catch all of our latest episodes on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, or Podbean. And hopefully we'll be coming to more outlets soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to us on Spirit Unplugged. If you have questions about our content, guests, or future episode requests, email us at spiritunpluggedpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple iTunes or Google Play. And join us next time when you need to unplug.